You sleep enough. You eat well. You take care of your work, your home, your obligations. But every morning when your eyes open, something inside already feels spent. Not sadness, not sickness, just empty fatigue. You tell yourself it's nothing. Maybe the weather, maybe age, maybe just another week. But deep down, you know it isn't that simple. It's a quiet exhaustion that no amount of sleep can fix. It follows you from meeting to meeting, from conversation to silence, like a weight under your ribs. It doesn't shout, it hums. People call it being tired for no reason. But there's always a reason. It's just one that hides beneath the surface, built from small compromises, invisible expectations, and years of keeping yourself together. You don't need another cup of coffee. You don't need a vacation brochure. You need to understand what this tiredness is really trying to say, because it isn't proof that you're weak. It's proof that you've been strong for too long. In this video, we'll look at what really drains you, not in your body, but in your mind, in your patterns, and in the meaning you've lost along the way. At first, it's hard to name. You wake up heavy, even after 7 hours of sleep. You stare at your phone, not because you expect anything, but because silence feels safer than thought. You move through the day on autopilot, one task after another, competent, reliable, present, yet somehow absent. This isn't the kind of tired that goes away with rest. You could sleep a full weekend and still wake up with that familiar dullness in your chest. It's not your muscles that are tired. It's your mind, your spirit, your will to keep performing the same loop that used to make sense but no longer does. Friday doesn't feel like a reward anymore. Weekends are not recovery, just a different kind of noise. The hobbies you once loved feel like chores. Conversations feel rehearsed. You find yourself staring through the people you care about, not because you've stopped loving them, but because something in you has dimmed. Most people won't notice. They'll see you doing fine, showing up, delivering, making things work. But deep inside, the pilot light that once kept you curious and alive is flickering. You're functioning, but not living. And so you start searching for quick fixes. You try caffeine, exercise, a few days off. They help briefly, then the fog returns. Because what drains you isn't physical effort. It's the constant emotional regulation, the endless need to appear fine, the quiet weight of holding everything together. You've probably told yourself, I'm just tired. But this kind of tired doesn't come from lack of sleep. It comes from lack of renewal. There's a difference between rest and restoration. Rest is what the body takes. Restoration is what the soul needs. And when the soul hasn't been restored in years, even 8 hours of sleep can't save you. Because beneath that exhaustion lies something deeper, a pattern that was learned, not chosen. And that's where we begin. Staying calm is a job. And every job consumes energy. Most people think exhaustion comes from what we do. But for many, it comes from what we suppress. The quiet, invisible work of holding yourself together, of showing patience when you're boiling inside, of smiling through disappointment, of carrying responsibility without letting anyone see its weight. That kind of control has a cost. Psychologists call it emotional regulation, the ability to manage what we feel and how we show it. It's what makes you civilized, professional, composed. It's also what quietly drains you. Every time you swallow anger, every time you hide anxiety, every time you force yourself to act fine when you're not, you spend emotional energy, and you don't get that energy back easily. James Gross, who studied this, found that suppressing emotions takes more effort than reinterpreting them. It's like clenching a fist all day versus simply opening your hand. One builds strength, the other burns it. You do this every day without noticing. You regulate at work, at home, with friends, presenting a version of yourself that keeps things steady. But steadiness, when it's constant, becomes a kind of strain. You start living in maintenance mode. Roy Baumeister called this ego depletion. The idea that willpower, like a muscle, gets tired. Each decision, each self-correction, each act of restraint chips away at your reserves. By the end of the day, you're not tired of life, you're tired of managing it. That's why people who seem the most stable often feel the most drained, because they're the ones doing the heaviest invisible lifting, the emotional labor of keeping everything smooth. Arlie Hochschild used that phrase, emotional labor. It's what happens when your job, or your role, demands feelings that may not match your truth. You perform patience when you're furious, empathy when you're numb, cheerfulness when you're empty. And because the world rewards composure, you get better at pretending, until pretending becomes your default state. Then one day you realize you don't remember what unfiltered emotion feels like. You're too practiced in moderation, too experienced in control. And when you can't even express exhaustion, it turns inward, becomes fatigue that has no face, no name, just presence. You see it in small things. The moment you pause before replying to a text because you just don't have the energy to sound polite. The second you fake a laugh because silence would be heavier. The nights you stare at the ceiling not because you can't sleep, but because you've run out of anything real to feel. It's not that you're weak, it's that you've been regulating for too long. Your nervous system is still running on presentation mode even when you're alone. Imagine a car that's driven uphill for years without ever cooling down. The engine doesn't explode, it just starts losing power. That's what emotional fatigue is. Not a breakdown, a slow fade. You've trained yourself to carry discomfort, and you've succeeded. But the cost of always being composed is that your mind forgets how to rest. And so, even when you finally sit down, body still, the mind keeps working, running invisible simulations. How to respond, how to appear, how to maintain. You are resting physically, but not psychologically. That's why you wake up tired. People say, just take a break. But you can't take a break from who you've become. Not until you understand the mechanism that keeps you on guard. The truth is, most exhaustion doesn't come from activity. It comes from resistance. From the constant effort to hold back emotion, reaction, truth. That's what drains the human battery. And you've probably been doing it for years because you had to, because it kept you safe, because someone once taught you that composure was strength. They weren't wrong. Composure is strength. But when it becomes permanent, it becomes a cage. The strongest people are often the most tired, not because they've failed, but because they never stopped showing strength. At some point, what used to protect you starts to exhaust you, and that's the turning point, when the skill of emotional control becomes a source of depletion. But why do some people keep holding the line, even when it's clearly killing them? Why do they refuse to let anyone share the weight? Because long before they learned to look strong, they learned that asking for help was dangerous. That takes us to the next layer, the psychology of attachment, and how emotional self-reliance can quietly drain the life out of you. You weren't born knowing how to stand alone. You learned it. Somewhere along the way, you realized that asking for help came with a cost. Maybe help didn't come when you needed it. Maybe it came with judgment. Maybe it came once and never again. So you stopped asking. And what started as survival slowly became your identity. I can handle it. The 4 words that built your strength and buried your softness. This is what psychologists call avoidant attachment, the habit of managing emotion by minimizing need. It looks like independence, but underneath, it's vigilance. Your nervous system stays alert, scanning for disappointment before it happens. You don't collapse, you tighten, you keep moving, you keep control. Over time, that constant readiness turns into fatigue. You may not notice it because it hides behind competence. You're dependable, calm, efficient. But calmness can be a disguise for exhaustion. Every time you say, "I'm fine," when you're not, you spend energy. Every time you say, "I've got it," even when you don't, you spend more, and the world will let you. Because the world always trusts the ones who look in control. That's the paradox of self-reliance. The better you get at standing alone, the fewer chances you have to rest. It's a quiet, invisible economy. You trade connection for safety. You trade comfort for control. You trade help for pride. And the currency is energy. There's another way of being, what researchers call earned secure attachment. It's the ability to stand alone because you can, not because you must. These people still value independence, but they also know how to receive. They see support not as weakness, but as cooperation. The difference is subtle but profound. One form of independence grows from fear. The other grows from maturity. You can test which one you carry. When someone offers help, what's your first reaction? Relief or discomfort? If it's discomfort, your independence is still armor. Michael, a man I once spoke to, said he never asked for help with his kids. He believed it was his duty to manage. A year later, he confessed he couldn't feel joy anymore, only pressure. He hadn't failed as a father, he'd just run out of fuel. Because strength without rest turns into erosion. This kind of fatigue doesn't scream. It settles in your bones, disguising itself as discipline. And yet, beneath all that control, the body keeps score. Your shoulders tense. Your sleep grows shallow. You wake up tired, not from what you did, but from who you've had to be. Self-reliance is noble, but when it becomes your only language, it costs you the ability to be held. And a man who can't be held eventually carries everything alone until he collapses under the weight of his own endurance. You don't need to drop your armor overnight, but you do need to notice how heavy it has become, because what once kept you safe is now keeping you tired. And there's another kind of exhaustion, deeper still, the kind that doesn't come from emotion or effort, but from time itself. From looking at your life and realizing that, somewhere along the line, meaning slipped away. That's the third layer of fatigue, the existential one, the tiredness that begins when purpose ends. There's a kind of tired that no amount of sleep can touch. It doesn't live in your muscles or your schedule. It lives in your sense of meaning. It appears quietly, usually around birthdays, promotions, or endings, moments that force you to look at your own timeline. You see who you used to be, who you thought you'd become, and who you actually are. And somewhere between those versions, something doesn't line up. That gap between expectation and existence is where existential fatigue begins. You start to feel heavy, not because of what you've done, but because of what you've lost sight of. Most people don't realize how exhausting time itself can be. Each year you carry invisible grief, the small things you've abandoned along the way, dreams you outgrew but never mourned, friends who drifted, parts of yourself you had to silence to survive. Every loss leaves a trace, and over decades those traces add up. Viktor Frankl called it the existential vacuum, the emptiness that forms when meaning slips out of your daily life. It doesn't mean you've failed. It means you've been living by borrowed definitions, goals that once made sense. Success, reputation, comfort lose their charge when they're no longer truly yours. You wake up, go through the motions, hit the milestones, and yet nothing feels like arrival. That's not laziness, that's disconnection. Because when life loses meaning, every action becomes labor without reward. You can still function, but the fire behind the function goes out. And that's the fatigue people mistake for getting older. It's not age, it's meaning erosion. In earlier times, people had rituals that renewed meaning, simple human rhythms, gatherings, letters, reflection, silence. Now our rituals have become content. Moments that once connected us have turned into performance. We post birthdays instead of feeling them. We celebrate milestones by comparing, not experiencing. and even joy starts to feel like an obligation. This is the fatigue of a culture that no longer allows stillness. When every moment must be captured, nothing can be lived fully. When every success is visible, private fulfillment starts to feel insufficient. The irony is we've never had more freedom and never felt more tired, because freedom without a framework is just noise. Too many choices, too little orientation. When everything is possible, nothing feels essential. And the human mind, without something essential to serve, begins to decay. So you distract yourself, you optimize, you upgrade. But even efficiency becomes another form of emptiness, because the more productive you become, the less space you leave for presence. That's the strange paradox of modern fatigue. You are drained not by struggle, but by the absence of struggle that means something. The weight you feel isn't depression. It's the awareness that life has become a loop, and you can't remember when it last felt alive. You start to notice the small signs. You no longer pause after finishing a task. You scroll before you think. You eat without taste. You talk without reflection. You live fast enough to never have to ask why. But somewhere inside, a quieter voice whispers, "What's the point?" That voice isn't your enemy. It's your signal. It's the soul trying to reorient itself toward meaning again. Existential fatigue isn't solved by sleep or success. It's eased only by alignment, when your actions once again serve what feels true, not what looks right. Meaning doesn't return all at once. It rebuilds slowly through presence, ritual, and honesty. When you stop performing long enough to feel your own life, energy starts to return. Not because you've rested, but because you've reconnected. This is the deepest layer of tiredness. The body isn't exhausted. The mind isn't burnt out. It's the soul that's gone quiet. And when the soul goes quiet, everything else follows. Emotional depletion, self-reliance, loss of meaning. They feed each other, creating the loop so many men live in silently. The good news is this kind of tiredness isn't permanent. It's an invitation to rebuild how you live, not just how you rest, to replace being fine with being real. Because fatigue, when understood, becomes direction. It tells you where your life has been draining without return. This is not the end of strength. It's the beginning of awareness. The moment you realize that being tired for no clear reason is a reason. It's your system saying something has to change, and it can, with understanding, with structure, and with dignity. That's what the next part is about. Not quick fixes, not slogans, but 6 deliberate actions that rebuild energy and meaning for a grown man who no longer wants pep talks, only truth. Feeling tired for no clear reason isn't weakness, it's a message, a quiet signal that something inside you, emotional, psychological, existential, has been running on reserve for too long. You don't fix this kind of fatigue by forcing motivation. You address it by restructuring the way your energy moves through your life. So before anything else, pause. Not to escape, but to observe. Ask, where does my energy go? What truly restores it? What have I been maintaining that no longer deserves me? Because fatigue, in its purest form, is just misdirected life force. There are 6 actions that can begin to redirect it, not in childish self-help fashion, but with clarity and dignity. First, the 90-day life audit. For 2 weeks each night, write 3 things. What gave you energy, what drained it, and what felt neutral. After 14 days, patterns appear. They tell you the truth no pep talk ever will. Second, establish 2 non-negotiables. Pick 2 things that guard your baseline. 7 hours of sleep. No work calls after dinner, a walk alone each morning. These are not goals. They are rules that protect your sanity. Third, delegate with dignity. List 10 things you handle weekly. Choose 2 to pass on. Not because you're incapable, but because leadership includes letting others carry weight. Delegation is not surrender, it's strategy. Fourth, practice boundaries. Say no once this week to something that adds noise but no meaning. A simple sentence is enough. I can't this week. I'm prioritizing something important. Every no creates room for one yes that matters. Fifth, the monthly meaning metric. At the end of each month, ask yourself one question. What did I do that made me feel alive? If you have no answer, design one small act for the next month. Something that isn't productive but feels true. Sixth, strategic help. Ask for one small favor, not to burden someone, but to test your capacity to receive. Notice what happens inside you. If it feels awkward, that's proof you've been self-reliant too long. None of these steps are dramatic. They're structure, not slogans. And when you live by structure, energy begins to return. Slowly, quietly, reliably. Because what drains you most isn't effort, it's disorganization of meaning. You don't need to find your younger self. You need to find your aligned self. The man who acts from intention, not exhaustion. Tiredness doesn't end your story. It invites a new chapter, one written with composure, discipline, and truth, not noise. So if you recognized yourself in this video, let that be your confirmation, not of defeat, but of awareness. You are not broken. You are simply out of alignment. And alignment can be rebuilt, one deliberate decision at a time. Because this kind of tiredness isn't the end. It's the moment before you stand up differently.